Definitely. All right, let's jump into our picks, shall we?
Yeah.
Let us start with the Eastern Conference. And we have not shown each other our picks. These are completely our own personal opinions, and then we're going to compare them side by side. In the number one seed, not too much of a surprise, I have the Milwaukee Bucks. Max, what do you have?
I also have the Milwaukee Bucks.
Okay, great. So far, so good. My reasoning behind picking the Bucks is they have been an absolute juggernaut in the regular season the past 2 years. They consistently win. Giannis is back-to-back MVP. Chris Middleton, underrated, I think. He is around that kind of East All-Star, which is slightly less valuable than a West All-Star, given the depth of the West. But he's a solid player. He can create his own shot during the regular season. He's super, super valuable to have. And then they add Drew Holiday, who just gives them another solid perimeter defender and a guy who can run a pick and roll and create his own shot for when teams are loading up on Giannis. And so they lose a little bit of depth, but this team is just, it's built to play in the regular season, and just their net rating was incredible last year. 538 projections, which I use for a lot of my reasoning in here, has them projected for a rating of 1633, which is the third best out of the teams in the league. And I think they're just going to continue to roll.
Yeah. The way I did my picks was I looked at last year's season and just asked myself, do I think the team has gotten better or worse, and what intangibles are there? And long story short, adding Holiday to the Bucks, I think probably makes them better. You've also got to consider in the East, just the way the season is, every team is going to play every team in their own conference 3 times and every team in the other conference 2 times. So in the weaker Eastern Conference, that's just going to be another advantage. I think Giannis, with the solid wings of Middleton and Holiday, just rolls through the bottom 6 to 15 teams in the East. It's going to be competitive against the top 5 teams, but I think they'll just be such a cut above the other teams and eke out enough wins again in the competitive matchups. Not to mention, I think they'll have an easier time in the West than most Eastern teams. Yeah, Bucks number 1.
All right. Number 2, I have the Boston Celtics.
So do I.
All right, there you go. 2 for 2. Boston has a similar story. This team, I think when you look whether they got worse or better, you could say they got marginally worse by losing Gordon Hayward, except last year during the regular season, they played the majority of the season without Hayward and were extremely successful. I think Tatum and Brown take another leap. I think their center depth is now very deep compared to last year, where they only had Tice and then a couple of young players. But now they have the 4 T's, as I like to call them. You got Thompson, you got Tice, you've got Time Lord, Robin Williams, and Taco Fall, who won't play a lot, but I just had to add it in there because his name also starts with T. And they've got 3 centers there that they can kind of rotate through in different situations, and that really solidifies their lineup. So again, this team, solid net rating last year. The wings are fantastic, and in an Eastern Conference that is weak at the bottom, they're just going to roll through those teams.
All right, for me with the Celtics, it's what I said before. Have they gotten better? Have they gotten worse? I think they've gotten better. I think adding Thompson plugs the biggest hole they had in their lineup. I think they were a great team without Hayward and will continue to be. They did so much without him that I didn't the loss of him is an option, but I just don't. When you have so many scoring options, that taking away that one thing, I don't think affects the team too much. I'm unfortunately high on Jason Tatum. I think he's just going to continue to get better, and we might see him even start to crack or look like he could be a top 5 player in the NBA if he continues what I saw him do in the playoffs, especially against the Raptors. So yeah, I think you've got great veteran or the best point guard you could ask for with Kemba Walker there. I think if Marcus Smart continues to work on his open three shooting and lockdown defense, you add that to Brown, and you've got three wings who can guard almost anyone in the league. When you add a tall, solid center like Thompson in, it's just a very versatile, threatening lineup that, yeah, I think has its way with the East for the most part and does quite well against the West and looks to go far.
All right. With my number 3 seed, I have the Toronto Raptors.
Okay, we start to differ. I've got the Nets.
Okay, interesting. I'll give you my argument for the Raptors. This is a pick that rewards continuity and previous success since 2014. And this team consistently has outperformed expectations. Lowry, Van Vliet, Pascal, OG, they're solid. I think Baines is going to be an underrated addition that will help their defense stay relatively strong. You look at 538 has them projected to be the fifth best team based on rating, based on their current rating, and gives them a 91% chance to make the playoffs. I think Van Vliet, Pascal, OG are all going to take a leap. Pascal looks like his shooting form has gotten even better in the couple preseason games that we saw. And I think just in the regular season, the defensive capabilities that they have and the ability to really be the best team to prepare for each matchup night in, night out, and the adjustments they make in the zones that Nurse throws and things like that will help them in a regular season context and allow them to outperform what people may expect from them.
All right. I think for the Brooklyn Nets, last season you had a sample of what can they do without Kevin Durant, and the answer wasn't too bad. You are bracketing out Kyrie, Spencer Dinwiddie, and Karis LeVert looked quite good when you take that kind of skill. And I'm assuming everyone's going to buy into Nash's leadership as a prerequisite, because I think I just respect the mind of Nash so much that I think all the pieces he has to work with Brooklyn, how can you not be a top 3 elite contending team? KD has looked like he's returned to form. I think his like scoring threat with Kyrie's playmaking, and then you have guys like Dinwiddie and LeVert who can score. You've got a solid enough backcourt to get done. I think there's going to be elite consistency from the Nets that the Raptors aren't going to have. And even though I like the Raptors in a playoff matchup against the Nets, I think Kyrie and KD get it done consistently in a way that I don't expect the Raptors star players to be able to do. I expect then any holes in that to be plugged by Dinwiddie, LeVert. And yeah, the Nets just bottom line look better on paper to me than the Raptors, and over 72 games I'd expect that to play out and make enough of a difference.
All right. I'll let you know how I feel about Brooklyn later on, but with the 4th seed, I have the Philadelphia 76ers.
I've got the Raptors.
Okay. So for Philadelphia, again, I made my picks valuing a little bit of continuity and a little bit of defense. So with Philadelphia, you could argue there isn't as much continuity as Horford leaves, Richardson leaves, coach change from Brett Brown to Doc Rivers, and a management change to Daryl Morey. But I think this team has shades of what it was 2 years ago when it pushed the 2019 NBA champion Toronto Raptors to 7 games. You have Simmons, Embiid, and shooting, and those two guys, if they take another leap, are 2 top 15 players in this league, and that has to mean something, who are guys who have impacted the game on both ends of the floor. And I just think with the shooting around them, this team's going to put up a ton of points, and they're also going to play pretty solid defense. Ben Simmons is a all defensive first team player in my book. He defends everyone. And Embiid, we saw a couple years at his peak of his powers, he's probably top 3 defensive center in the league, and really protects the rim. So I think this Philadelphia team's going to turn things around. And based like last year, they had a tough year, but I think they're going to come back and the pieces fit together better. And I think they're going to have a great season, especially on the defensive end, which it means something in the regular season.
Yeah. For the Raptors, it was really hard making these picks for me, just trying to decide how much of a factor do I want COVID to be. Because let's be honest, like one team has a bit of bad luck or a bit of poor management, and by one player, spreads, catches, and like all of this just goes out the window. Who knows what the Bucks look like if you lose Giannis for 2 weeks and maybe there's a complication. Like you can't predict this stuff, so I tried not to. But the Raptors last year had to deal with injuries with almost all of their starters at some point in the season, and they managed to put out a ridiculously impressive record, all things considered. So I didn't want to consider it too much, but even though what I just said about, I don't think the Raptors are going to have that elite consistent production from one player, they manage to make it work 90% of the time because someone can usually step up. Like Freddie can usually, if Freddie can't find a way to like step back beyond the arc 3 to put them in the game, then Lowry can find a pass or make that 3 himself, or Siakam can just go off for 10 minutes in the paint. Someone usually steps up most of the time. And I think in this COVID season, when you almost have to assume most teams are going to have at least one bout of bad luck, I like the Raptors' depth, variability, and ability to call on different guys on different nights to have a strong season. The big question for me is going to be whether Baines can step into the shoes that Serge and Gasol have left behind. Boucher as well. He, having had time to see those two operate, he in some sense should have a bit of an advantage in knowing what role he's trying to step into and fill. I'm discounting them. I think there is going to be a hole and something left behind from losing those two players, and the Raptors' overall performance is going to suffer from it. But I really do like our depth, our ability for like 5 or 6 different guys to be the go-to guy on any given night, and I expect that to play out pretty well.
Okay. With my 5th seed, I have the Miami Heat.
I also have the Miami Heat.
All right, cool. So with the Miami Heat, there's a bit of recency bias of how they played in the bubble, and I tried to discount that when I was making this pick because they did not have the same success in the regular season. They were a middle-of-the-pack defensive team, middle-of-the-pack net rating, but they have guys who are huge difference makers, and I think Bam will take another step after getting his new extension. Butler is going to play very well and very consistently, but I think they'll rest him because a big factor for this Heat team is they played very late into that bubble along with the Lakers, so they'll need to rest some of their guys throughout the season in order to make a deep playoff run in this season. They're a team that has a ton of shooting, specifically Tyler Hero, Kendrick Nunn, Duncan Robinson. In preseason, we saw KZ Okpala and Strauss just dumping threes on people. So there's definitely potential for them to have some newer pieces that they develop. But I think overall, they've lost a bit because Iggy is 1 year older. They lose Crowder. They lose Derek Jones Jr., who are solid wing defenders. And they get Mo Harkless. And Mo Harkless doesn't move the needle. Mo Harkless has bounced around. I don't think he's a replacement for those guys. So it's a team that's, of course, going to be in the playoff picture. But I think their shooting could be streaky, and the resting of Butler and Bam throughout the season is just going to have them on the lower end of the Eastern Conference standings at my 5 seed.
Yeah, I didn't put too much consideration into whether they rest Butler or not. I don't know his injury history or wear and tear path. Like some guys are just able to put up ridiculous minutes consistently and not show a lot of sign of it, and some guys aren't. I had it implicitly kind of assumed that Butler's work mentality, his build, the way he's not like overly bulky. So I have him as one of those guys who can in fact go beyond like the norms and expectations. Especially, I think he found his role as the heart of the team in that playoff run. And I think he makes the most impact on defense and in transition. I think you can do those two things and then not count on him too much offensively. Count on Tyler Hero to continue to step up his game, Bam Adebayo to continue to step up his game. The big variable for me is, can Goran Dragic continue like that, like amazing, like, was it career playoff highs he was putting up?
Yeah, and he's an incredibly underrated player in what he provides.
So you were talking about Iggy's age. It's, for me, it's much more about Dragic's age, and it's almost a benefit coming. I guess he's coming off his injury, but like he was playing amazing basketball not 3 months ago, so you kind of like that going into this season. The Heat were one of the toughest ones for me. I considered slotting them higher, but ultimately I don't think they have the offensive consistency to do so. But I think they're going to have a lot of confidence. I think Butler is going to be an absolute engine for this team, and it's going to be a pretty solid regular season for them. Even if they can't consistently get it done against the league's elite, they'll split enough games with them and look dominant against the bottom, is my prediction.
Okay. With my 6th seed, I now have arrived at the Brooklyn Nets, who you had ranked much higher.
I've got the 76ers, who you had ranked higher.
Okay. So for Brooklyn, you've made the case for their regular season success. So I'll just talk about some of the things that I am worried about with this team. They finished with the 4th worst points allowed per game in the East last season. And I think if you look at what their starting lineup looks to be, their best defensive player is Kevin Durant, who's coming off an Achilles injury. And so I have very large concerns about the defensive ability of this team. And I think it's going to be a lot of nights them just out shooting the other team, which they can definitely do. But defense has to play some sort of role when it comes to regular season success, because another team we'll talk about later, Atlanta, they had the worst defense and they didn't make the playoffs because of it, despite their amazing offensive prowess. Same with Washington. And so with the Nets, they've got this great deep team. When you've got Jeff Green and TLC as your like 10th and 11th rotation guys, your team's pretty deep. But I don't see the defense. And it's, again, that kind of continuity factor where teams in their first year really coalescing together. It's going to take them a bit of time to kind of ramp things up. And I could see them being very, very good near the end of the regular season, but I think it'll take them time to build up to that success. So that's why I have them ranked lower.
Yeah, that's a good case. I guess we'll see. To be honest, my ranking the 76ers where I did was just, I simply think the other 5 teams I ranked higher will find a way and perform better. You talked about the team coalition. That's, I guess if I had to say, I would say the new coaching system, a couple of new players, a new management system. I think the 76ers are going to need some time to find their identity. And you've got to pick your winners and pick your losers. And by necessity of the winners I've picked, the 76ers are the loser. They could very well surprise me. Embiid and Simmons could surpass my expectations. But when I look at like the Celtics, the Nets, the Raptors, the Heat, the Bucks, I think those are all just teams that are going to bring it a little more consistently. But we'll see. I had them rated as highly as I could while thinking those teams will outperform them, basically.
It is important to note. So we have the exact same 6 teams in our top 6. They're just in different spots.
That is true. So yeah, you could almost make a tier of that, or 2 tiers, I guess.
Yeah.
Although we
And
differ.
that's definitely how I feel about that first tier. It's those 6 teams. And so now we kind of move into that second tier of the Eastern Conference, and these will be our play-in teams. And the top of that play-in team list, in the 7th seed, I have the Indiana Pacers.
I've got the Washington Wizards.
Okay. So with the Pacers, I see them as a similar team to the Raptors, just a slight level below. They play a great amount of defense. They had the 3rd best points allowed per game last season. They've got a great core of guys with Brogdon, Sabonis, Oladipo, Warren. Turner coming off the bench. You really want to see him take another step and maybe embrace that bench 3-and-D center role. And then they've got younger developing guys with Justin and Aaron Holiday and Goga Bitadze. And I think they are a team that, based on their defense, is going to help propel them. And then they're going to have guys to make enough shots. The biggest thing for them, and the reason that they're on this lower end, is the new coaching hire of Nate Bjorkgren, who was a former Raptors assistant. And they're going to need some time to implement his system. But I think they're going to have success because Bjorkgren and Nurse have very similar philosophies, and that could lead to Indiana just winning some games based off of him making unique adjustments that you don't often see from NBA coaches. So I have them in my 7th seed.
For the Washington Wizards, it's pretty straightforward. Bradley Beal coming off his best points per game season, plus the mix-up of Russell Westbrook, who I think is going to fit in on that Wizards team a lot better than he did on the Rockets team. Westbrook kind of at the end of his prime, like he has 1 or 2 more great years probably left in him before the physicality can't quite get it done. A good enough supporting cast on the Wizards. Guys like Hachimura who are still developing and improving. I'm banking on Beal and Westbrook being a high performance, successful bet for the Wizards that is good enough to have, like, I don't want to say elite consistency in the same way I mean when I say it about the Celtics and the Nets, but against most of the teams I've ranked below them, plus the poor defensive teams like you've pointed out with the Nets, I think they just get it done and they put up enough points to plug the holes around their game.
All right. I'll jump right into my Washington talk because I have them in my 8th seed. And
because I have the Pacers at my 8th seed, so we're still very...
There you go. Yeah. So with Washington, Russ and Beal are going to be a great combo. And if you have 2 guys on one team who can put up 50 to 55 points on any given night, you're going to definitely be in all these games. It's just how are they going to piece together that other kind of 50 points? And that comes from Adeni Avdia, who is going to be a solid player because he's played pro basketball already. But we still don't really know what to expect from him. Thomas Bryant, I think, can take another step. And then you've got Troy Brown, who's a pretty decent wing defender. And obviously you mentioned Hachimura and Mo Wagner, I think, are other young pieces that fit well. But it's really going to come down to those 2 guys putting this team on their back. And Beal did a great job of that last year. So adding in Westbrook, I think, could really help them. And that's why I kind of have them accelerating, because you have 2 top 20, 25 guys, you're usually going to be a pretty successful regular season team.
For the Pacers, the Pacers were a tough pick for me. Just looking at Oladipo, I think this is a contract year for Oladipo, and players typically perform better in those type of circumstances. They got swept by the Heat, which has got to be frustrating, but then you look at how the Heat did for the rest of the playoffs and maybe you can cut yourself a bit of slack. It's an improving team, and I felt it was tough for me to put an improving team lower in the ranks. Again, just simple necessity. I think I mean, they did get swept by the Heat, and that sweep was how the Heat were kind of finding their feet. So not a ton to say about it. I think you
Okay.
covered it quite well.
All right. So now we have our teams who would not normally make the playoffs, but now have a shot. And in my ninth seed, I have the Atlanta Hawks.
I've got the Orlando Magic.
Okay. Interesting. So with the Atlanta Hawks, I kind of go against my philosophy here where like I really don't like teams that don't play defense, and the Atlanta Hawks were the worst defensive team in the Eastern Conference last year. They allowed 120 points per game and they scored around 112. And so I don't think they got better defensively, to be quite frank. I guess you could say that Capella provides a bit of rim protection. You could say that Bogdanovich at least is a slightly better defender than Kevin Huerter. You could say that Gallinari is a big body, that Reddish and Hunter are long wings who have defensive upside. But as long as you have Trae Young on the floor, your defense is not going to be elite. And this team, similar to Washington and similar to Brooklyn, is going to need to outscore a lot of people on a lot of nights. I like how deep their team now is with a bunch of pretty solid pieces, but I can't see them getting into those top 8 spots just simply because of the lack of defensive ability. And the biggest thing for me is, does Trae take another step forward, and they get him to be more productive off the ball now that they've got other ball handlers? And then we'll see what kind of step Reddish takes, because people have been really high on his offseason progress. And it'll be fun to see what they get of Onyeka Okongwu as the rookie rim runner. The last thing I want to say about Atlanta is I don't really know where John Collins fits in, and maybe they'll find a way to work him in, but they've got a lot of bigs. So they are definitely a team that I could see as a potential trade candidate moving into the regular season.
So for the Orlando Magic, I simply looked and where they were last season and adjusted them accordingly with how I aligned the top of the division, and that had them drop a couple spots but still stay as a bottom contender, we'll say. Not a ton to say about the Magic. I think they get it done against the bottom of the East. They'll struggle against the West, but that'll still have them ranked higher than teams like the Pistons, the Knicks. I guess I have the defense being a factor in them being better than the Hawks, excuse me. And yeah, so number 9 for the Magic.
All right, I have Orlando in my 10th seed, so I'll kind of build on what you're saying. And I had them. I know I mentioned in the last podcast that Charlotte had this mojo that I really liked, but Orlando, even though it's not the sexy pick, it is the boring pick, and those are the teams that usually beat out in the NBA. Those are the teams that usually win out in the regular season. Orlando had the 4th best points allowed per game last season. They've got a ton of long guys who played solid defense. They're really going to miss Jonathan Isaac, and I think that's why they fall a couple of spots. But they get Chuma Okeke back, who was injured all of last season, and they love him there in Orlando. So we'll see what he does. Cole Anthony is going to be a spark plug off the bench for them. And I think just they're going to need to have guys like Aaron Gordon, Mo Bamba, Markelle Fultz take that step. And another team that you could see possibly trade either to try and compete for some reason, or as a team that might realize, okay, we might need to find a top player in this deep draft and look to dump a guy like Vucevic, who is a kind of in a win now mentality, and trade it to a contender. And so that's pretty much it. The Steve Clifford is a coach who makes his teams play solid defense. And so I have the Orlando Magic squeaking into this last play-in spot over a team like Charlotte. Who do you have in your 10 seed?
I have the Charlotte Hornets in my 10th seed. You persuaded me a little with your mojo talk. I think we can go back to how we started this NBA segment. I think there's going to be something beautiful at the late stage season of the NBA where those teams on the periphery are hunting for that top 10 spot or that 10th spot as a chance at the end of the playoffs. And I think I like what I've seen from LaMelo Ball. I think he has an opportunity to find himself this season and then make a difference towards the end of it. I bought into what you're telling me about the Charlotte Mojo. I think you're describing similar to the Raptors, which that like a lot of guys on any given night could step up and be the guy that night, and that's going to be an asset come COVID time. I'm discounting Atlanta's defense as the reason they're not going to be able to crack the top 10, which I don't think of Charlotte as having particularly great defense. I just think they'll be a slightly more well-rounded, able to get slightly more done, and that mojo, that momentum, that desire for that 10th spot is going to be an intangible that gets it done for them to cement it.
That wraps up our East preview. Honorable mentions are the Chicago Bulls and Detroit Pistons, but both of those teams are fairly boring and not that great, to be frank. So we don't really need to talk about them much.